stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Leng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the Survivor cards in the Circle Undone, the 4th Deluxe expansion for the Arkham Horror LCG. There are 4 Survivor cards in this expansion. However, as you know by now, I am reviewing the cards with the Tarot trait separately, so this review will deal with the other 3 cards. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get started. The first Survivor card in the box is a new skill. This is Able-Bodied. It has combat and agility skill icons and the innate trait. It has the game text, while you control 2 or fewer item assets, Able-Bodied gains 1 combat skill icon and 1 agility skill icon. While you control 1 or fewer item assets, Able-Bodied gains 2 combat skill icons and 2 agility skill icons instead. FFG spoiled Able-Bodied in the second or third preview article for the Circle Undone, and the card immediately reminded me of Not Without a Fight, a Survivor skill from Black Star's Rise. Not Without a Fight gains an extra willpower, combat, and agility skill icon for each enemy engaged with you, while Able-Bodied gains extra combat and agility skill icons based on the number of item assets you have in play. The fewer the better. Players have had a mixed reaction to Not Without a Fight, but I found it to be quite powerful in Silas Marsh and Arita Young builds, which is where I expect to see Able-Bodied played the most. Wendy Adams, Ashcan Pete, William York, and Calvin Wright tend to play a lot of item assets, including Cherished Keepsake, Fire Axe, Gravedigger Shovel, Leather Coat, and Flashlight. Most of those investigators don't seem to really care all that much about combat or agility skill icons either, and I don't think they're going to be all that interested in Able-Bodied. I certainly don't see them weaning themselves off their item assets to play it, that's for sure. Silas Marsh and Rita Young, on the other hand, are all about combat and agility, respectively. Much like Steadfast, the Guardian skill in this box, Able-Bodied has 3 combat and 3 agility skill icons right at the start of a scenario because there are no items in play. It provides investigators with a little added protection against all the negative skill modifiers floating around in the Circle Undone, while they do get their powerful items such as Fire Axe or Track Shoes into play. Silas is all about skill manipulation, and Able-Bodied gives him another pile of combat and agility skill icons to work with each turn. Come to think of it, I could see Minte Fan also taking a shine to Able-Bodied to shore up her weakest stats. Min's not the strongest or most athletic investigator out there, being a secretary and all, but some Min decks I've seen play very few items. Min could commit Able-Bodied to a skill test for 4 combat or agility skill icons, which would really improve her odds of surviving some of those nasty treacheries that pop out of the encounter deck, especially during a campaign such as the Forgotten Age. I wasn't all that impressed by Able-Bodied the first time I saw it, but I could see playing it in Min, Rita, or Silas during the Forgotten Age or the Circle Undone campaigns. Unlike some of the other skills with variable skill icons, Able-Bodied is at full power right from the start of a scenario. I'm not going to say no to 3 combat or 3 agility skill icons on turn 1. Able-Bodied does get weaker as you play more items, but items do tend to come and go, either because they are used or discarded due to asset hate. Able-Bodied isn't going to revolutionize the Survivor class by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think it is going to find a home in certain builds going forward. The second Survivor card in the box is Active Desperation. It's a free event with 2 combat skill icons and the Tactic and Gambit traits. It has the game text, as an additional cost to play Active Desperation, choose and discard an item asset that takes up at least 1 hand slot from your hand or play area. Fight, you get plus X combat and deal plus 1 damage for this attack, where X is the chosen asset's printed resource cost. If you succeed and that asset was in your play area, gain X resources. Have you ever felt like throwing stuff at an enemy in desperation? Well, Active Desperation is the card for you. This handy event lets you turn any item that takes up a hand slot into a weapon that in most cases provides a significant bonus to your combat skill value, as well as bonus damage. If the fight action succeeds and the item you threw at the enemy was in your play area, you gain some resources to boot, which is amazing for survivors who do tend to struggle in the resource department. In an ideal world, you'll be able to throw those flashlights that have run out of batteries, or firearms that have run out of ammo, turning that relatively useless item that was taking up a hand slot into a potent one-shot weapon and some bonus resources. Removing that item from play also has the potential to make a card like ABLE-BODIED a little stronger if you happen to be playing that card. You may also run into situations in which defeating an enemy is far more important than investigating, in which case feel free to throw flashlights regardless of the number of supply tokens that are still on it. Don't forget that you can use Active Desperation to turn duplicate items in your hand into weapons as well. You won't get the bonus resources if the fight action succeeds, but if you've already got a fully charged flashlight in play and a spare in your hand, you can always pitch the spare for +2 combat skill value and +1 damage. Survivors are the masters of recursion and with cards such as Scavenging and Resourceful, so they do have ways to retrieve items from the discard pile if they throw them at an enemy. One survivor investigator in particular, William Yorick, has recursion as a special ability. Active Desperation works extremely well with Yorick since he can discard an item with Active Desperation for the combat and damage bonuses. As long as William defeats the enemy during the fight action, he can trigger his response and use the resources generated by Active Desperation to play that card again. For example, if Yorick is armed with an old hunting rifle and the rifle jams, Yorick could throw it at an enemy rather than clear the jam. Yorick would receive +3 combat skill value and +1 damage during the fight action. If the fight action succeeds, Yorick gains 3 resources, which he can use to then play the old hunting rifle from his discard pile, reloaded and ready for action. That is a pretty cool interaction. It's worth noting that Active Desperation does have the tactic trait, so it is fair game for Mark Harrigan. Harrigan can use it to unload duplicate weapons or empty firearms at enemies. He can even stack it on Stick to the Plan before a scenario begins, so he can hit an enemy for 2 damage whenever he has an item in his hand or in play. I've heard of some players experimenting with Active Desperation in Zoe Samaras as well, which makes a lot of sense considering how many duplicate items Guardians tend to play. Active Desperation is also an attractive option because it is one of the few level 0 cards with 2 combat skill icons, and those combat skill icons can come in handy in their own right. Active Desperation is a great card with a lot of applications. I really like the fact that you can turn any item in your hand or play area into a one-shot weapon. Depending on the item, the bonus to your combat skill value could be quite significant, and that +1 damage is always gold. Survivors have plenty of ways to get items back from their discard pile, so the cost of playing this card can be quite minimal. If the item happened to be in your play area, you can score some bonus resources, which are also fantastic, whether you're planning to replay that item from your discard pile or not. The 2 combat skill icons and the fact that it's a free event are just the icing on the cake. Really cool card here. The next Survivor card in the box is Track Shoes. It's a 3-cost asset with an agility skill icon and the item, clothing, and footwear traits. There's a limit of 1 footwear per investigator. While Track Shoes are in play, you get +1 agility. Track Shoes also has the following response: after you move, but before enemies at your new location engage you, exhaust Track Shoes, test agility 3. If you succeed, move to a connecting location. I looked at Track Shoes briefly as part of my Rita Young deck tech, so some of this may sound familiar. I've tested Track Shoes in Rita, and it's a damn good card. Cards that boost one of your base skill values or let you take an extra action are usually quite strong, and Track Shoes does both of those things. An investigator with Track Shoes in play gets +1 agility, which is amazing for investigators with high base agility skill values such as Rita and Wendy Adams. The shoes also let an investigator take an additional move action each round, ignoring any enemies at their location, as long as they take a move action first. Now, there's no guarantee an investigator wearing Track Shoes will get to take the extra move, since they must pass an agility 3 skill test first. However, that shouldn't be much of a problem if you're rocking a 5 or 6 agility like Rita or Wendy. Of course, that extra move action is only good if there's a good place on the board to move to. When I was testing Track Shoes, I was playing the Dunwich Legacy campaign, which tends to have larger maps. That extra movement came in extremely handy during many scenarios, including extracurricular activity, The House Always Wins, and Blood on the Altar. The Path to Carcosa campaign tends to feature larger maps as well, so I'd expect them to help investigators during that campaign too. The Forgotten Age scenarios are a lot more cramped due to the nature of the exploration deck, so finding a good place to move during that campaign is going to be a little more challenging. If the prologue scenario is any indication, the Circle Undone will likely have maps on the larger side, which is going to make Track Shoes that much more valuable. Track Shoes have Rita's number written all over them, and the card is a great addition to her deck. I suspect that other investigators are going to covet them as well. Movement is such a critical part of this game that any card that lets you take an extra move action without having to evade an enemy or enemies at a location first is going to be extremely powerful. If you need proof, think back to the main path in the Devourer below. It can be teeming with enemies once you advance to Act 1B. If you've got a high enough agility or some agility skill icons to spare, Track Shoes makes bypassing all of those enemies almost trivial. And it's not just the Devourer below. I can think of similar situations in the Dunwich Legacy and Path to Carcosa campaigns. The House Always Wins and the Unspeakable Oath are two scenarios that come immediately to mind, and I'm sure there are many others. Investigators do hate getting cornered, and Track Shoes does give them a way to avoid enemies while sprinting to the finish. That's going to do it for my review of the Survivor cards in the Circle Undone. Survivors do pretty well in this box. ABLE-BODIED is one of the better skills with a variable number of icons released in this box, since it is turned on, so to speak, from the opening turn. Active Desperation is very thematically appropriate for Survivors. It also works very nicely with all the recursion tech at the Survivor's disposal. If that's not enough, it may also provide a few bonus resources, which then you can use to pay for the item that you just pulled out of your discard pile. Track Shoes is another great addition to the class. Movement is an extremely important part of this game, and Track Shoes gives investigators a leg up in that department, in addition to some extra agility and a way to bypass enemies. Those are some great abilities for a level 0 card. Once again, Survivors do extremely well, but that shouldn't come as a surprise to many players at this point in the game's history. Survivors, I have a hard time thinking of bad Survivor cards that we've seen, and I'm sure there will be plenty more great ones as the cycle continues. That's going to do it for this review. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.